Hi, this is Richard Edelman, and you're listening to The Trust Makers.
Hi, I'm Justin Blake, the Executive Director of the Edelman Trust Institute. Today I'm joined by Sarah Kate Ellis, the CEO of GLAAD, a nonprofit organization focused on LGBTQ+ advocacy and cultural change. Sarah Kate is a media executive who is in the middle of her 10th year leading GLAAD. Under Sarah Kate's stewardship, GLAAD has grown in its advocacy for acceptance of the LGBTQ+ community. Most recently, she accepted the Governor's Award at the 75th Annual Emmy Awards and was named to last year's Time 100 list. I'm privileged also to work with Sarah Kate as a member of GLAAD's board of directors. Sarah Kate, welcome to Trust Makers.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
For those who may not be familiar with GLAAD, it started in 1985 as a media advocacy organization. GLAAD's work has expanded quite a bit since its inception. How has the organization evolved, and what are the main areas of focus now?
We're going to be 40 years old next year. And when we were founded to help be a media watchdog, actually, for journalism and hold them accountable on their reporting, specifically of the AIDS crisis back in the 80s. At the same time, what our really smart founders realized was that not only did we need to be watchdogs, but we also needed to lobby Hollywood to tell our stories because we were invisible. So whatever the media and journalists were putting out there about who we were is how the world was receiving us, because we weren't in storytelling. And if we were, it was often usually very tropey and negative. So that's how we were founded. As the world has evolved, though, and media and culture and influence have all grown so much. I mean, think about it. It used to be really a one-way street culture formation out of Hollywood or news and journalism. And now CEOs create culture, right? There's this network of influencers that never existed before due to the rise of social media. And everybody has a platform. And so with that expansion and democratization of media, so too have we expanded. So we go where culture is created to be a change agent. The way that we view ourselves is that we work in the court of public opinion. Our job is to introduce people to LGBTQ folks and make sure that we have a voice at the most powerful and influential tables in the world to ensure that we're safe. Ultimately, what we're driving towards is the safety of our community. And you also need to soften the ground to move policy forward that ensures safety for the community.
Earlier on, you mentioned that even CEOs are influencers now. The Edelman Trust Barometer has consistently found that consumers and employees expect companies to speak out on societal issues. At the same time, there's greater polarization around societal issues, particularly here in the US. How do you counsel companies on deciding whether engaging around LGBTQ+ issues are right for them?
So I always start with, first and foremost, what are your values? Everything has to align back to your values. It's like any strategy you have as a CEO or a CMO is that you have the foundation of who you are as an organization and a company, and then how you show up outside of that is then tied to your values. When you start at the core and you build it out from your values, you build in a wall of protection for yourself because you're aligning your company to who you are out of the gate. And so there's not going to be hesitation. There'll be crystal clear clarity within the organization on what makes sense and what doesn't. I also believe in decision trees, right? So I think that's a very important part of the way we operate today in this world because it moves very quickly. And so we need to understand how decisions are being made within companies, who are the Ds, those are the decision makers. Who are the Is, which are the influencers in the decision-making process. And having that coordinated at the highest level is critical to how companies show up out in the marketplace.
What does allyship look like to you right now? Is it about speaking out on LGBTQ rights? Is it behind the scene actions? What are the different ways that corporations can be allies? And does it vary based on what you just talked about in terms of a company's values?
I think it's really important that as allyship and companies, that the companies assess, and we do this with them, what makes the most sense for them and their brand. If they win, we win, because it's tied together. But if a company who, you've heard the term rainbow washing, I'm sure, a million times. And basically what that means is that companies who are just marketing to our community versus actually joining the movement. And so companies who spend time to understand our community, then know how their brand marries to our community and makes sense in how they show up as allies. For some, it is coming out in very public ways. For others, it's quiet diplomacy behind the scenes, using their leverage to help the LGBTQ community, especially in an environment where we're seeing over 500 anti-LGBTQ bills. It's a moment to see where your influence and power as a brand can help marginalized communities.
So particularly at this moment when there's this enormous legislative backlash in many states and municipalities, about that quiet diplomacy bit, because obviously this is the piece that our listeners aren't going to hear about, right? Our listeners are going to read about the brand that gets into a clash around an influencer, or there's a major backlash against something that a company did. But most of what's going on with companies and our community is done in the background. So can you comment a bit about that sort of work and that form of allyship?
You said a few things there that I think are really key. The headlines are really about the backlash or the perceived folks who had a moment last Pride. What I want to be really clear about is that we've never at GLAAD had more corporate partners than we do now. I do not see corporate stepping back from this space at all. In fact, I see more them stepping into the space in more real and authentic ways. And what I mean by that is oftentimes a lot of these companies would really put on a show for the month of June. What I've seen, even with Target, is a great example, is that actually what they've done is now threaded it through their entire year. So we're looking at 365 days of Pride, which is something, as a leader in this movement, we have been lobbying companies for the whole time. Don't just show up for Pride. We're actually LGBTQ the other 11 months of the year too. And so that is looking like quiet diplomacy behind the scenes, where companies are helping to either push out bad legislation that's going to be harmful to their employees and harmful to their brand and harmful to our community. I think it's really important when you're looking at this, and we're talking through this, that one of the reasons I know companies aren't moving away is because of this next generation, right? Gen Z is the most LGBTQ generation that we have ever seen. So depends on the study you look at, but between 20 and 40% of Gen Z are LGBTQ. When you look at the non-LGBTQ folks in Gen Z, 80% are allies. And what's beautiful for our community is that our allies expect people to show up for us, and they hold them accountable like we hold them accountable. And so in order to future-proof your brand, CEOs and companies know that you have to support the LGBTQ community. And what that support, as we said, looks like is different based on the brand.
Our trust barometer reports time and again show that particularly Gen Z employees want to work for a company that's very pro-LGBTQ. Gen Z buyers want to buy from brands that are pro the LGBTQ plus community. So very much verifying what you're saying, You talked about how companies and brands and leaders need to future proof based on Gen Z. What are some of the ways that they should be doing that?
I think it gets back to their core values and really looking at those core values. It's about including this generation in the conversation, not anticipating what they will want, but asking them what they want and what they expect. And it really, at the end of the day, it has to be authentic and real because that's when it falls apart. I'll also say, just in terms of what we saw last Pride Month with the two companies that really got pressured, there were over 300 Pride campaigns last Pride. Most of those were challenged by this very small group of anti-LGBTQ folks. The other companies didn't step down. They actually stepped in and they talked about how they delivered products for everyone and how they are for everyone. And they didn't let the bullies bully them into reimagining what their presence would be. And that was the difference between being a headline and not being a headline. And so that goes back to Gen Z too. Gen Z, you cannot give them hot air. When the going gets tough, you better stand where you say you are, or they will call you out on it.
So let's look at those 298 companies last year who made a commitment and stuck to that commitment. I'm sure that in several of those cases, they got some shaky feet, right? And then they call you up. What do you tell them that reinforces their position and helps them be clear and stand true to the commitments they made?
We have a device that scours the internet and the dark web to see where these attacks might be coming from because they're usually conjured up online. It's very much a social media and 4chan kind of whipping each other up around these things. So after those two things happened, what we started doing was calling the folks and saying, we see this is coming, so that they weren't caught like the other two. They knew it was coming. And then we talked to them about how we can support them through that. And we have a lot of assets where we can help support folks and shine a light on the positive work that they're doing to drown out the negativity that's coming after them. Right, Nike, you know their brand and who they have been. Cracker Barrel, very different, didn't back down and really got pushed. Chick-fil-A got pushed, didn't back down. So brands that you not commonly thought of in this space. And I think it's about working with us to shine a light on the positive piece of this and also getting your messaging right out of the gate.
The Cracker Barrel story is not well told. Do you mind double clicking on that one for a minute?
Well, I mean, it's like the others, honestly. They're not different. They had a pride campaign and this group came after them and they ignored them and said, this is who we are and we serve everybody. Meals are for everyone and this experience is for everyone. We don't leave anyone out. And sort of that everyone kind of messaging is can really drive out the negativity that is trying to be divisive.
So we're recording this in May, and a few times we've mentioned Pride Month, which is June, so it's coming up. Are the questions that you're getting from corporations different than the sorts of questions you used to get in the past around Pride?
So there's two things. There's another thing that's happening that we're seeing really start to bubble up, and it's shareholder letters. I don't know how familiar folks are with this, but these are letters that are written to the company, usually the general counsel of the company and the board secretary, that challenge the company on their LGBTQ stance. And we've been seeing these pop up all over the place. And this, again, is a very small but targeted group. And if a company is not thinking about this, which oftentimes they're not, it can really catch them off guard. And it can lead to them doing things that are anti who they are as a brand. And we've seen that happen a couple of times. There's a system and a process for shareholder letters when they come in, and they follow the process no matter the shareholder letter. that can leave it open to interpretation. And so we've been doing a lot of advising on that front. So most shareholder letters, two things happen. One is that you negotiate with whoever assigned it and you find a medium ground. Number two is it goes to a vote at a proxy meeting, which oftentimes companies don't want. However, what we found, especially with these anti-LGBTQ votes, is that they get less than 2% of the vote. So they're not making any headway, but they are pushing this until they find another way and another avenue to do this in. And it's with all the big brands. So it's happening across the board. That's something new.
And that's part of a broader backlash against ESG, I would imagine.
At the center of it, that's exactly what it is.
And you mentioned there's a second type of question that you're also getting from business now.
I'm getting the question of, we want to be present in Pride, but we want this threaded throughout the year. So I think it's more about how do we really help the community than just market in a month. If from all the craziness of last year, I think that is one of the greatest gifts that we got, was that actually made companies be more thoughtful about what they're doing and how they're doing it, as opposed to, I think what they were hoping would be the reaction was companies would walk away from the community.
Going to one of the core parts of GLAAD's mission, it's around representation of our community. And with so many of the bills that you mentioned being anti-trans bills, can we focus for a moment on trans representation and what is GLAAD doing to continue to evolve it?
So what we know at GLAAD is that the visibility of trans people over the past decade has skyrocketed in such a positive way. 10 years ago, 6% of Americans said that they knew somebody who was trans. A few years after that, it doubled. And now, today, we're at 30% of Americans who say they know someone who's trans, which is kind of remarkable in a very short period of time. A lot of that is through visibility. Let's focus on the 70% who don't know someone who's trans, because the challenge with that is that they're getting their information from the media. And right now, the media talk track is politicians who are pushing these anti-trans bills. So it's a really negative narrative around trans folks. But we know it's the same thing that we've done for years with LGBT folks, is that when you know someone, it's very hard to hate them. More Americans say that they've seen a ghost than know a trans person. And so our job has really been on all fronts of media to drive trans storytelling. So whether that's through Hollywood and lobbying Hollywood to be more inclusive, I keep begging Hollywood, I need a trans Will and Grace. I need you to create that moment where this person comes into your home, into your life, that's funny, that you laugh with, that you cry with, because that connection is so deep and it changes. President Biden said that he feels that Will and Grace did more for marriage equality than anything else. And I think what we try and do also is we have a messaging lab. We built ads around trans folks to introduce the world to trans people. And we run those in key places where we know are the lowest amount of people who know trans folks.
It's a very marketing savvy listening audience we have. So let's explore those ads that you've just started rolling out as well to get a little marketing speak for a minute. What were the messages that resonated with your key audiences? I know you did a lot of testing. What did you learn? And then how has that then illustrated itself in the advertising that you've done?
We have been incredibly lucky to have partners like Ground Media and Ogilvy and just across the board to help us with this. And we've brought in some political messaging folks who know how to test quickly. What we found is that we can move sentiment about 7 percentage points with showing people 3 different ads. One includes a mother of a transgender person, one includes a transgender person, and one includes a medical professional who is a father of 5 kids and a religious person. And so those 3 combined, when somebody sees those 3 ads, it moves 7 percentage points, which is pretty dramatic, actually, in the world of moving perception. We also have just launched a campaign called Protect This Kid to counter the narrative of protect our children, which is about protecting our children from LGBTQ people. And this is about relating to LGBTQ people that we too were children. We too were growing up. We feel lonely and isolated and want to be a part of society as well. And so it's really about being more inclusive. And we've launched that in Times Square, and it will be running on outdoor media throughout the country. And then we have a couple of other ads that we've just created, and those are going to run nationally. So the first set are very targeted digitally. The second, Protect This Kid, is social media and outdoor media. And then we have another group of ads that are 3 trans people, different ads, 3 different ads. That's going to be running nationally. And so we see this political moment as an opportunity as our community is being politicized. We're not political, we're just human beings, but we are being politicized by candidates. And so we're going to take the script and we're going to flip it.
It's notable that your message testing reflects one of our very recent findings from our Trust in Health report, which is that medical professionals are the most trusted around medical information. How have you used doctors and other medical professionals in your advertising, and are they going to continue to be important allies and advocates around the work that you're doing for trans representation?
Absolutely, because a big part of trans representation, or I should say misrepresentation, is around the medical piece of it. It's the trans messaging that's out there by politicians is filled with misinformation and rhetoric. And I mean, trans people have always existed. They've always gotten the medical help that they need, whatever that is, that should be. And the majority of Americans actually really don't care about this. They really don't care. They want people to live their own lives in the privacy of their own lives with their own medical professionals and their parents, if they're younger, or their partners, to make those decisions. And we see that time and time again, even in advertising, right? One of the things that I think this group would be interested in is that we do an advertising report annually. This will be our 2nd year, and it is so low. It's under 2% of the major ads include LGBTQ folks in it. Yet 70% of non-LGBTQ Americans think better of companies who are LGBTQ inclusive. And so that means through their advertising, through their employees, through the way that they show up as companies. So if you thought that consumers were a hindrance, that's not there. If you thought the next generation was a hindrance, that's not there. If you think the community is an hindrance, we're all in with you. So I think it's really important to understand that this is a very small minority of people with an outsized voice that is creating a lot of misinformation.
I also think a piece of it, even for the most well-minded of leaders and companies, is some discomfort with how do I talk about some of these issues? How do I represent certain members of the LGBTQ plus community? How do you work with leaders to portray the community properly and maybe helping get over some of those barriers, even from a kind of well-meaning company?
We have what we call the GLAAD Media Institute. It's our think tank and consultative work. And in our consultative work, We're retained by a lot of companies over 60 who we work with on this. And then we scenario plan with them. You're going to go out with this. Here's how it's going to land. Here's what we would recommend. And then even if you don't take our advice, we'll scenario plan, like this is what could really go wrong with that. And then they get to do what they want. It's their business, right? But we work very closely hand in hand. Now, I want to be really clear though, because our clients are our community and we have to represent our community, and we will still hold corporations accountable. It's our job in this world. So it's a really important piece, and we do it all the time. We prefer to work behind the scenes and not publicly. I think in the past, we were very known for working publicly because we couldn't get these conversations going behind the scenes. And now we do have those conversations, because when a company wins on this, we all win on this.
Sarah Kate, I'd love to end on a more personal note. I've known you for a long time. I've gotten to see you in all sorts of settings, including when some really terrible stuff is happening in the world. I've never for a moment known you to be downbeat. How do you maintain your stamina and your positive energy, particularly in the face of what you're dealing with for the community?
I think if you're an advocate or you do this work, you believe in the possibility of what the world could look like. And so for me, it's really exciting because even though we are in the middle of a lot of heavy backlash, really horrible, that people didn't even know trans people 10 years ago, and now 30% of Americans do. So I hold on to those pieces, and then I set my sights on, so let's get to 40, let's get to 50. And I know the world's going to be a better place. And I know that the world that we're building now is a world for everyone, not just for some. And that's really exciting to me. And I meditate.
Well, you know, I'm all for the meditation approach. Yeah. Sarah Kate, thank you for sharing your insights and expertise. And to our listeners, thank you for listening to The Trust Makers.
Thank you for tuning into The Trust Makers, an Edelman podcast in partnership with Advertising Week, where we speak with leaders and other trust builders across institutions. See you next time.